Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is Monday, August 27th, 2018. And tonight's topic we're going to revisit from last night is a cashless society really a threat to liberty? This is part 2. Before we get to that, just quickly in the markets, gold actually closed up again today to 1211. It opened the day around 1206, fell all the way down to 1202, but did close on a upward tick. And silver still below 15, but it also rose to 1487 from 1480 where it opened. It had fallen down as low as 1470. The cryptos, just in the last hour as we were trying to get online here, moved up in a big way. Bitcoin almost at 6,900, up almost 3%. Bitcoin Cash up 4% to 543. Ethereum up 4.5% to 285, and Litecoin at 60, up about 5.5%. All right, let's get back into, is a cashless society really a threat to liberty? And we've given some examples last night as to why we thought that, but it gets a bit more complicated, and I wanted to give you some ideas. And as I go through these problems that we have with a cashless society, we have to consider whether it's really cashless what's causing this problem, or maybe it's something else, or a combination of something else. So we've all seen examples where, for example, cashless means automatic. Money's easy to spend, it's also easy to take, and that convenience can become a tyranny. So for example, you have automatic payments set up on your credit card, they just take the money, and you don't even know it's happened, and it just shows how easy it is for money to leave your account. You don't physically have to part with it. You don't have to even write a check, which is still a form of cashless, but the money is out of your control. It can be taken from you. And that's part of the convenience, though, that they can just raise the price and say, if you say nothing, we're just going to take the extra amount out of your account each and every month. And you start to have a problem with that. And the other problem is that's something where you have a contract with someone, but there's a risk of confiscation. Now, we saw, people may have forgotten, bank bail-ins as happened in Cyprus. Now, that's less of an issue because of cashless, but more of an issue because it's the bank not even having the cash in the bank. And even if they did have the cash in the bank, it's their ability to say, we're not going to give it to you. So in 2013, we had the failing banks in Cyprus subject to a bail-in, where they got partially bailed out the bank, but then some people didn't get all of their money out. Now, you think that's, money's in the bank, you're safe. The old expression, money in the bank, doesn't mean that anymore. It means you might have money in the bank if they decide to give it to you when you go to get it, or it may not be there when you want it. And we've seen things like civil forfeiture. Your bank account can be frozen. And you would say, well, that's a problem of cashless, because if I had the cash, well, maybe it isn't a problem of cashless. Maybe it's a problem of the government having control over the banking system and having the authority to go in and seize your bank account, freeze your bank account. And we saw with the internment of Italian Americans, the family that had their father taken away the day after, the Italian guy in New York, the day after, I was going to say 9/11, but the attack on Pearl Harbor, they'd also freezed his bank account back in 1941, and they didn't even know it until they went to pay their brother or their son's tuition at the college. So civil forfeiture is something that can happen not just in a cashless society, but it can happen when you have your money in a bank that you don't necessarily have the ability to stop what happens to your account. Now, also, some people think that when you have a cashless society that theft is more difficult. Now, that's not really true. It's probably easier, I would say, Because if you're carrying around a few $100s worth of cash, they say, well, that's someone, you're an easy target. Well, not if you're armed and not if you're going to put up a fight. Yes, maybe they can take it from you because you have it. But I would actually argue that in cashless, it's easier to take the money from somebody that you never have to confront. You steal it online. You go straight in to their bank account, you take their money, you hack in, whatever it is, and you don't have to ever confront anyone. So I would say theft is not eliminated when you go cashless. I would say it's increased the idea that people can steal your money without ever coming near you, and you wouldn't even know that it happened. So an online thief never has to confront you, doesn't have to commit violence, doesn't have to crack a safe, get past an alarm system, a dog, you with your armed weapon. They just have to figure out a way of hacking it. So the argument that a cashless society is better for convenience because there's less theft, I've never bought into that one. But there is a risk of your system failing when you have a cashless society, because when it's digital, so many things can happen. The grid can go down. The electricity can go down. The digital system database that stores your system can get hacked, corrupted, lost. So you have system failure when you have a cashless society. Now, when you have a gold or silver coin in your hand, gold isn't going to degrade in your hand. It's just not going to go away. It doesn't require there to be light on or light off. The gold is the gold. That is the selling point of gold and silver. They are immutable, and you have them. Whereas in a cashless society, the cash is only there if the inputs are there to make it there. Now, in cash, a dollar bill or a quarter is similar to gold, not in the sense that it is valuable intrinsically, but at least with the cash, you have the cash in hand, and if something goes wrong with the system, the digital system, the electricity, and so on, you still have the physical specie. But another problem with the cashless society, besides system failure, is the risk of being tossed off the system or exiled. Now, when you have cash, and we talked about this the other night, the same with gold or silver, they could take it from you, but they have to come and get it. And that is unwieldy. But let's say you're part of a movement that involves 17 million people, and it could be anything, it doesn't have to be that outrageous, but 17 million people, everyone knows you're part of this group that does something. Could be a handgun group, it could be fly fishing group, just a group that you're all connected, and they decide, whoever has control over the system, they don't want to give you access to your money. Well, in a cashless society, they can do it. So even if there's no system failures, the digital banking system works properly, they can shut you off for doing the wrong thing. It could be 17 million people all bought the same book. It's the only way you're connected, but they think that that book is dangerous, and they just want to make sure that you don't have access to the system. Now, there's other reasons why they can give you access to the system, not give you access to the system. You can have bad credit. Maybe you didn't pay your banking fees. Maybe you're disputing a fee. Or maybe they think they're trying to help you out. They think you're a victim of identity theft. But the problem with being exiled from the system is, what do you do if you've been exiled from the system? So they basically are creating someone who now has to somehow find a way to transact. Well, if you can't use the digital currency that the government has authorized you to use as legal tender, you're going to have to use something else, something that's either illegal or banned, or something that isn't what they deem to be official. And there's also the risk of not having access to the system. So, for example, you lost your cell phone. Well, now how are you going to get online and use your money, have access to your money? Just tonight, I was off for half an hour because I was having issues accessing the system to get on to do this podcast. And that can happen just for no nefarious reason. It could just happen. It could happen because they're trying to shut you out of the system. It could happen because you've lost your computer. It could happen because your computer or smartphone has been damaged. And if you have no way of, you've lost your password. A lot of things can happen in a cashless society where there's a lot of steps between you and your money. And then, of course, a risk of the cashless society is you create a vast, powerful criminal underground economy. So while trying to put everything into grab all the taxes, track all the transactions, they may cause people, either because they've been tossed from the system or because they don't like the loss of privacy, they may choose to transact outside the system, and they may use things like gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. And even cash, though. People may try to use cash, and that's where, at least governments, they can outlaw cash. They can limit its use, or they can do like they did in India, which is say, aha, you think you're clever. You got all that cash? Well, here's what we're going to do. That cash isn't worth anything anymore. It's only going to be worth the X number of rupees until tomorrow night, and then it's not worth anything. So now you could have hoarded cash in preparation for issues or whatever you had, and you would know you always have it with one announcement. Then go on TV like Prime Minister Modi did in India and said, you don't have that money anymore. That value. You don't have that value anymore. So the government could just take away even your cash. So we're seeing now how, I hope you're getting the picture here. It's not just about cashless. It's about a centrally controlled government that can do these things even to cash. And we saw in the Italian example, the Italian internment example, that was back in the 40s. And we're going to give you some more examples when they weren't necessarily cashless. But what cashless does, it just gives authorities the ability to call in their money more easily. They can still eliminate cash. They can still track you, but when you have cashless, they can do it better. And of course, let's say you have, well, we've seen in the past outcome-based politics. From people being forced to bake cakes, companies being forced to pay raises, minimum wage laws, forced to buy health insurance. And that's the government, again, telling you what you can and cannot do with your money. So when you are in a cashless society, they can direct where your money goes. So for example, with your health insurance, they can force you to buy health insurance. Now, they've gotten rid of the individual mandate. However, when it was in place, they can just extract it out of the penalty in your tax. So you almost are losing a property right when the money is in digital form because you don't have it. Now, when you even have cash, dollar bills, $10 bills, quarters, nickels, dime, whatever it is, you at least, you think you own that, and you do own it more than you do if it's stored in digital form by the government or by the bank. I mean, in digital form in a bank statement. But that money, that value is only there at the convenience or at the will of the issuing entity. So you may have hundreds of dollars of bills, or you may have rolls of quarters. They could say that quarters that are older than 1989 are not worth anything anymore. They did that in Sweden. They wouldn't accept the old bills that some grandmother had saved a cigar box full of old kroner notes, and when she went to bring to the bank, they would not take them. And so even having cash doesn't help you if they're trying to go cashless or they want to control what's going on. Now, the reason they don't accept a lot of old bills is they get to the point, unless you can prove where you got them, source of funds, it's still their money, and they could say, we're not going to assign the value of those notes that you have. In other words, they're going to default on them, and they're going to say, well, they're old, we don't know how you got it, so guess what? You don't have $2,000 worth in that box there. You have nothing. So even with cash, that can happen. And then, of course, there's a loss of privacy. At least when you use cash, there's generally not a record of a digital footprint of every place that you spent the money. Now, the problem with people saying, well, why are you worried about your privacy? If you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to worry about. That's always the stupidest argument when people make that. I don't understand why they don't understand. So you can buy perfectly legal items. Let's say you buy a hammer and sickle communist flag or a Confederate flag, or you buy over-the-counter drugs like Sudafed. Those are legal to buy. There's nothing illegal about them. But that may give the government to some idea that you're a threat, or you're engaged in illegal activities, or you have the wrong political points of view, and they can create a profile from your purchase history. You buy a lot of precious metals, you buy a lot of books, you buy whatever it is you buy on Amazon, and they can form profiles and algorithms that say, well, when they buy this type of product and this amount and these certain quantities, they're on a list, and if they get to a certain point, we automatically just shut them off. Because, not that they've done anything wrong, but generally people who have these buying patterns, they send up a red flag and we're going to shut them off. And the other problem with cashless is you lose the idea of things having value. And this is another topic we've mentioned, is the dictation of value rather than people understanding and learning value on their own. And I like to use the example of Tesla. I have no idea why people would think, again, this isn't investment advice, I just want to use it as an example. It has no profits, it has no earnings, it has a CEO who seems to be off his rocker many times, and yet the price is worth $60 billion. Then he said he was going to take it public. And normally when you take something public, it's because you want to own the company and reap the benefits, the dividends, the cash flow from that company. Well, there isn't much there. Why would you pay $72 billion for it? The only reason it's worth $65, $72 billion, whatever it's worth, is because it's public. And there's people willing to pay that price for it. But you can't live off of that. You wouldn't get a return off of Tesla. So when you take cash away from people and they don't make change and they spend things and they don't know what they're spending, you're actually creating an entire, we already have generation or two of people who don't walk around knowing I've got $18 in my pocket. They go in the store, they know they need to buy this, that, it's $13. They understand it, they get change. They get a concept of value. They don't just throw things in the cart, come up to the front, hand over the credit card, and off they go. So there's clearly a sense of loss of understanding, and I would say of economics. If you go back to when my grandmother first came to the United States in the early 1900s, she used to tell a story. Well, she didn't tell the story. Her kids, my uncle and father told the story. My grandmother would go into the grocery store. They put the peas down on the table, and I'm on the counter, and she'd say 22 cents. And they look at her, you know, because the price is stamped on there. And she's trying to negotiate the price of the peas, because that's what they did in Italy. You went to the marketplace, and the average person, you would think peasant, someone who doesn't know much, every day would go into the marketplace. They would see what was on the stand, and they would see maybe they had an indication of interest price, and they'd haggle. And the average housewife would go down to the market every day. They knew how much money they had in their shoe or their purse or whatever, and they were going to buy the day's fruits and vegetables and bring them home. And they had to understand the value of what they had in their possession and what the value of what they were buying. It was not a dictated value. It was a true market-driven value. Everyone, the economic professors and PhDs always talking about, you know, understanding the market and economics. I would argue that the people that used to go to the marketplace every day understood it a lot better. And you lose that. You don't just whip out the credit card in the grocery store and you have no idea whether the price you're paying is up or down from a few days ago. People don't have that sense. They're not market participants in the same way. And the more you go cashless, the less you have a connection to value, because you don't even really see what you're giving away, even though arguably over the last, since 1965, you haven't been giving away coins of any intrinsic value, but at least there's some numbers been on them. Quarter says 25 cents and so on. Before, you were actually handing over pieces of silver before 1965 for your item. So you clearly developed a sense of savings. I saw the other day for kids, it wasn't the other day, it was about 10 years ago, when my kids are younger, they had, it was a toy, well, not a toy, it was a learning tool, and they had 100 plastic pennies, and the price was like $1.89, and the idea was to teach the kids how to make change with the pennies. And I thought, you can go to the bank and get 100 of them for $1. Why would you pay $1.89 for plastic pennies? So I think you lose that tangible sense of economics and of value that you learn yourself. You spend your own money. When it's in a bank account, when it's on a credit card or a debit card, you don't have that connection to the money. You really are not, you're not connected to it. And when the government dictates what you can buy, what you can't buy, you're even moving it further away. And then when central banks buy stocks, interfering in the marketplace, you don't even understand the value of a corporation. One of the things I was taught long ago, when you look at a stock price, you say, okay, if the market cap of Tesla is $72 billion, if you had $72 billion, would you buy that company? And the answer is, yeah, because if I put down $72 billion, no, the answer is no, but if the answer is yes, it would mean that if you put the $72 billion down, that in a relatively short period of time, 10, maybe 20 years, you get all your money back and you'd still have the company, because let's say at a P of 10 or 20, that would mean you'd get all your money back in dividends. You'd still have the company. Maybe it could grow even bigger. But people don't think that way anymore. People buy a stock because it's going higher. They're not thinking, well, it's worth $72 billion. It's overvalued. No, they're thinking it's Tesla. It's boy wonder. It's boy genius. And they're not thinking through value because they haven't been taught value. They haven't even gone down to the corner store to haggle over some bananas and peas. They've lost their tangible sense of value, and therefore they can have value dictated towards them. All right, so those are some of the, and you probably have some of the comments. I'm not following the comments right now. You probably have a lot of examples of the downsides, and I've just given you a number of them of the cashless society. But how did we get there? And I think we got there long before people were even thinking about cashless. And this is where we get into answering the question. I don't think that cashless is the real problem. I think cashless is just another tool in the problem. The problem is the movement away from a free market society and one more closer to a top-down society in which the cashless becomes a tool. So we've heard about governments around the world. Ireland has a ban on small cash withdrawals sometimes. JP Morgan says you can't put cash in a safe deposit box. So it's the combination of governments having 100% control over legal tender laws, and then the banks, which are in a sense wards of the government, as we've learned, acting whenever they want to control, to let you know that that cash is their money. And the reason I said that's your cash, because they can't even control your cash. So even though you're not in a cashless society, JP Morgan says don't put the cash in the safe deposit box. Or a bank can say, You can't take that much cash out. Now, let's contrast that to if you own gold, silver, or cryptocurrencies. There is no Mr. Gold. There is no Silver Corporation. There is no Bitcoin person who can tell you how much and where you can move your gold, silver, or Bitcoin. If you want to take your Bitcoin somewhere, if you want to transfer Bitcoin from one wallet to another wallet, there's no limit. You can just do it because there's no one telling you that you can't. They can't cut you off of the Bitcoin system. So government actions are really the issue here rather than the concept of cashless. They can reduce the amount of cash in general. They can limit the supply of cash, and they have done that. People don't understand that there's only about $2 trillion in physical cash, physical US dollars, and about 60-70% of that's overseas. So even if you wanted cash, you can't even get it. There's not enough cash. There's two issues here. People always talk about if you wanted your money, you couldn't go to the bank and get it. That's true for two reasons. One, they're not going to give it to you if you ask in large amounts, if you actually have large amounts. And because also they don't have that there. But they also don't have physically the cash to give you. And this reminds me of when you talk about COMEX default. They don't have the gold or silver there, and therefore it's going to default. But no one wants it. And it's the same reason what they've done with cashless is no one wants the cash. People, if you have $2,000, $1,800, $700, most people don't. They keep the money, they keep, quote, the money in the bank, even though they know there's not enough cash there. There's not enough cash in the world. $2 trillion is nothing. I think in the U.S. it's like $800 billion in cash. There's not a lot of cash rolling around, and that hasn't stopped people from leaving their money in the bank. Now, let's go back all the way to 1913. You create the Federal Reserve. Now, that wasn't, and the income tax, both in the same year. Neither of those were designed to eliminate cash, but it comes down to it reduces a portion of the income that you have under your direct control. Remember, the real issue is not cashless. Cashless would be fine if you had 100% control over your money. But we've seen 10 minutes ago or so, we were talking about how you can get cut off from your money. They can take your money. They can confiscate it. You could be cut off because the power doesn't work. You lose your device. There's so many ways you could be separated from your money. But even before cashless, the federal income tax was designed to do just that, to separate you from your money. They're going to take a portion of it. And taxpayers became a new term, and they had to set aside money to pay the federal government, who they would decide how that money, extra money, would get spent. Back then, they didn't take the money out of your check. You had to set it aside and then figure out at the end of the year how much you were going to pay. Now, of course, back then it was, only 1% are going to pay it, and it was a low rate, so it's no big deal. But today, we know that the top tax rate is in the 30%, and corporate taxes were very high until Trump reduced them, which means that the federal government would control half the value of the money. So you don't control that value, and all the way down to the grandmother with the coins, that's real control. That's freedom in your pocket, being able to direct where your money goes, 100% of your money. You decide what you're going to spend it on, how much you're going to have, and there's no interference from anybody. But once they start taxing you, well, then a portion of your money goes and is spent by people who may not know how to spend it. And then, of course, the Federal Reserve, their entire policies, and that was created the same year, they have set inflation rates. So you say there's a certain rate of inflation that's desirable, and the Fed thinks that's 2%. So they set the inflation target rate, and people have called that a stealth tax, and it is. Because if they mean to debase your money 2%, they're taking it out of your pocket without you knowing about it. They're devaluing it in your pocket. So those two acts were created well before they were even thinking about cashless. Also, they were created during a time when people had gold and silver as legal tender. People were walking around with gold and silver in their pockets when the Federal Reserve was invented, so to speak, and when they came up with the income tax. These two acts were created, they had nothing to do with being cashless. They had everything to do with taking control away from you and your money. Same thing when they put artificially low rates. Money's cheap. People are encouraged to spend it. They're not just taking it from you, but they're trying to direct you where to spend it. And again, that's different than what you might normally do based on your own decisions. They have created, through monetary policy, they're trying to manipulate how you might spend your money and where you might spend it. Not just when they tell you you have to buy something, but obviously when they lower interest rates, they're telling you, directing you to buy stocks and to buy real estate. And then people who fight that, they put it in other assets like gold and silver, and they make sure that they go down. So you may think that you're being prudent by making your own decisions and not listening to what the Fed tells you through their monetary policy, but they make sure that if you don't listen, you are punished. And that's another way of removing your individual power to decide how your money is spent and what you view is valuable, because they've taken that away, because they're saying, well, see, you invested in gold and silver and it went down. And now you start to think, well, maybe it's not valuable. So they mess with you in the sense that they dictate what is valuable, because the proof is in the pudding. If you had just listened and bought Netflix and a bunch of stocks that don't make any money. I know Netflix makes some money, but it doesn't make money to justify an 800 PE. If you bought Tesla, you'd have been better off. So what they're doing is they are not only taking the value of your money away, moving the goalpost as to what is value. And they're doing that, and it has nothing to do with cashless. Now think about what President Roosevelt did, again, pre-cashless. He decided in 1933, with a stroke of the pen, that he's going to take the gold away from you. He wasn't going to take your cash. You could still have cash, but he figured he'd take the gold from you. He'll pay you $20.67, and then they'll revalue it about 6 months later at $35 an ounce. And so they revalued even the price of gold, and it had nothing to do with cashless. It had everything to do with the government being able to recall its money. Now, the reason they were able to recall the gold was, one, was easy legally, because those gold coins, they're issued by the government. They can recall them. What they couldn't do, and they didn't want to do, they couldn't devalue them. They actually wanted to revalue them higher. But they're able to take them on that concept. But they also took any gold. And there were also other pieces of gold that they were able to confiscate. There were exceptions for rings and so on. But the point being is that there was nothing that stopped them from recalling their money. And their money at the time was gold. So they were able to even recall gold. I'm sure it was fewer people turned it in than if they were to recall their digital money, because if they recall their digital money, it's a lot easier just to identify it all and shut it down and say it doesn't exist anymore. Couldn't do that with gold. They actually had to physically get it and then melt it down and send it to Fort Knox. But then we also had in the 30s the passage of the Social Security Act. And that authorized amounts to be withheld directly from your payroll. So now you have less access to your money because the government has decided they're going to pull a certain amount of your paycheck, not just for taxes, but also for Social Security. And that money is going to no longer be under your control. It's going to be under government control, and they're going to save it prudently in a Social Security trust fund for your retirement, which we found out that is not what they have done. Finally, they figured out in 1943, a very clever thing. It's called the automatic payroll deduction. And that was it required employers to withhold the federal income tax. They weren't content with waiting to the end of the year for people to calculate how much they owed them. They wanted to get their money right away. So again, you have a situation, it's really got nothing to do with cash, how you're losing control over your money, because prior to this, you would get your money and you would prudently have to figure out how much you had to put aside to pay for taxes. Well, they've taken that decision away from you since 1943, and you don't have that choice anymore. Then they passed the Medicare in 1965. Add that to Social Security, so they have to take Social Security out of your paycheck automatically. They have to take Medicare now to pay for your old age, and there's already automatic payroll deduction. So anyone working at a company will get a pay stub. It'll have an amount that you earned, and then it'll show everything that's been taken out automatically. Nothing to do with cashless, because they did this well before the digital age. This is really a function of losing control over your money. Now, we've said that losing control of your money is easier with digital, but they've been doing this for decades and centuries before there was digital. And then removing the silver coins and silver certificates in the 60s, same thing. They just decided that we can print coins that aren't silver. We can put the numbers on them, and they will be just as good as anything else. And when you do that, they're taking away or changing your concept of value. They're telling you that 25 cents is 25 cents whether it's in a 90% silver coin or whether it's in a cheap copper nickel clad coin. And they managed to do that. They dictate the value. There were some people who said, no, hold on a minute. These 90% coins are worth more, and they hoarded them. But for the most part, they were able to get away with it. So you see how you've moved over the last 100 years or so towards a removal of the value, a removal of the value that you're left with from your control, and then changing of what the value of what you're going to buy is by telling you what's valuable through monetary policy. So it's not as simple as, I do not like cashless. Cashless is bad. No, it's really a function of centralized control over money. It's not cashless that's the problem, because there are conveniences in cashless, but cashless can be a tool, but it depends on what type of cashless. Now, private cashless or private cryptocurrencies are not subject to being withdrawn. I have never liked the idea of money that is not backed by anything. I did not like Bitcoin when it came out. I don't like the idea that you could just say something is worth something. But a fascinating thing happened to me in the way I think about it were two things. One was when India just decided a couple of years ago that the 85% of their cash then circulating was no longer going to be worth anything. And I thought, whoa. One of the reasons I thought Bitcoin was worthless is I don't need it to go buy stuff. I can have cash, I can go buy it. There's no big deal. It doesn't help me to have Bitcoin to buy coffee. What's the point? And then I realized, well, they can just take it away from you, even though you had the cash. That was a big problem for me. And then the other thing was, and I still can't fathom it, but I'm not the person who makes the decisions on this, is, okay, so you can't take no one can kick you off the Bitcoin system. No one can take your Bitcoin from you by fiat. But then I thought, why is it worth anything? And I guess the answer is it's worth something because people think it is, and they've agreed through the marketplace that it is. And if that's the case, I'd rather have the collective understanding of market participants saying that somehow Bitcoin is worth, right now it's $6,935, than 12 guys in a room deciding what it is and deciding how much money there's going to be and deciding when and if you can have it. And so that's why I became I'm not a fan of Bitcoin as Bitcoin. I'm a fan of it in the sense that it is somehow managed to exist as a censorship-free form of currency where you can wake up. The problem is you can wake up one morning and it's worth zero. That's the market. But no one can do that. Now, there isn't an entity that can tell you it's not worth anything anymore. There isn't an entity that can say we're shutting you off the system, because they can't. And then the other thing they've done is, as we mentioned, there's not enough cash out there. They've been removing the larger bills from circulation. In the United States, the largest bill you can have is $100, which means you can't accumulate a lot of cash. Because you always see in the movies, the suitcases worth of bills. Well, it's bad enough that they reduce the value of that what you have, and then they limit your access to it potentially, tell you what you can buy, tell you what you can't buy, tell you how much something is worth, and take out automatic deductions of your money. But then they decide, well, if you spend a certain amount of money over, let's say, $10,000, you're going to get reported as being suspicious. So now they've even limited your ability to buy perfectly legal things, but if you start spending a little bit too much money, they're going to want to know about it. So again, nothing to do with cashless, has everything to do with wanting to control the money. The cashless is a tool to allow them to do that. And then, of course, we had President Nixon. He just took the country off of gold standards. Everybody's always talking about, oh, we should just return to a gold standard, everything will be fine. No, it wouldn't. Because the government they're in control of the gold. You have to trust that they hold the gold. You have to trust that they held it in amounts that they say they have. And you have to trust that if it is a redeemable gold, like the Bretton Woods Agreement, where you could bring your dollars if you're a central bank, that you would actually get your gold. Well, we found out, agreements be damned, they didn't get their gold. And the problem with that agreement also is it really wasn't backed by gold, because you and I couldn't go to the bank with $10 in 1970 and go and get $10 worth of gold. That was reserved for the central banks. So again, nothing to do with cashless, everything to do with fiat, meaning the actions and the actions and acts and proclamations of either a president like Roosevelt or Nixon, or the Federal Reserve, or a congressional tax statute, or bank secrecy statute. So you have these acts that can act in a way that can reduce the amount of money you have, your ability to use it, the value of your money. And again, nothing to do with being cashless. Now we have Patriot Act, we have FACTA, we have to report if you have money overseas. So all of these things, they're moving you towards not necessarily a cashless society, but one in which your access to cash, the value of what you can have, the amount of it that you can have, the percentage of it that you can keep, the amounts that you can spend, are all subject to it coming down to it's really not your money. And then ultimately they could say, well, we're just going to take it away from you, which they can do even before they go cashless. They could have always done that with the bank account, freezing the bank accounts. Now, it can be done on a much grander scale and a much quicker in a cashless society, where the cash that is run by the government is run through a centrally issued digital currency, like let's say, for example, FedCoin. But again, if you're on the cryptocurrencies that are privately issued, they can't do that. I know a lot of people say, oh, they can backdoor and the CIA invented it. I haven't heard of cases I've heard of hacks where people have been targeted by the government or by a corporation like Facebook or whatever, and where they've lost their money because of something they did. People lose their cryptocurrencies because they get hacked. And that hacking generally doesn't have anything to do with who they are. It's not like, oh, well, that guy is a Democrat, we're going to take his money. No, that guy has a wallet with 150 Bitcoin in it, and we want it. Now, the thing about cashless also is that those are all governmental actions. We're going to stop here, and tomorrow we're going to talk about how cashless became where we are today through technology that really had nothing to do with government and everything to do with a desire to create innovation. Just as we saw in transportation, we had the horse for 5,000 years, and horses were transportation, period, until the car came along and people decided that a faster type of transportation, even if it was more dangerous, more expensive, was preferable, and then all of the money and innovation went into developing the automobile. And we're talking about it today with Tesla. They're still trying to make a better car that works better, doesn't make as much pollution, or whatever it is. I'm not saying that Tesla does that, but the idea is nobody is working on horse and buggy projects. And I think that's where we are. And tomorrow we're going to go through the way cash developed digitally and how it gets promoted. But it's not just a governmental thing. It's actually a human progress of innovation to create different ways of transacting. All right, let's see what the comments are. Oh, we've got a lot of people watching tonight. Sorry for the delay. I had trouble getting online. All right. Carl Joseph DeMarco, he was with me about an hour ago when I tried to start the podcast and it didn't work. Thanks for sticking it through. Same with All Is One and Shark Air. Oh, you didn't miss it because you're lucky. We had technical difficulties and I had to delay it till 8:30. All right. De La Ville, if they instituted negative interest rates, you would see your balance shrink unless you spent it. Yes, the problem with cashless in that it is that well, the reason they want cashless is so that they can institute, if they want to, negative interest rates. Because what people would do is if your balance shrunk, they'd say, well, screw that. I'm just not going to keep the money in the bank, and therefore the banks would be decapitalized. They wouldn't like that. You would then take the money out of the cash out of the system and store it to avoid that. But as we mentioned earlier, there's not enough cash for people to even do that. So they really would like to go cashless, totally cashless, so you didn't have that option to take the cash out of the bank. But as we talked about last night, the central planners have realized that going totally cashless then runs the problem that if they get invaded, we use the example of Sweden, if Sweden gets invaded by Russia and Russia takes over the central bank, then they have access to all their money and there's no cash lying around anywhere else because they've gone totally cashless, and therefore they can't finance their resistance. We are profiled on YouTube by virtue of your subscriptions and comments, don't you think? Well, yes. Now let's say, and this isn't far-fetched, that if YouTube working with, or actually you don't even have to work with the government. I'll give you an example. There was a guy, I think he does Jihad Watch or something. He got shut off from his bank account from Patreon, not because Patreon shut him off, although Patreon has shut off people. They shut off Laura Southern for taking some boat ride to look at migrants. I don't know what her issue was. But with this guy, he wrote something about Muslims, and Patreon didn't have a problem with it, but MasterCard had a problem with it. So they shut him down. So yes, they can get to the point where just as they can censor you on social media platforms, they can censor you on financial platforms. And that's why I say, when people talk about they trash cryptocurrencies, the one thing they have going for them is you can't get kicked off of them. There isn't a Mr. Monero or a Litecoin corporation that can decide you're not worthy to have their money because they don't own it. All is one. Yes, and by what you buy. I don't know if these comments, I don't know if they came up while I was speaking, people were thinking of it, or they're responding to something I said. So I'll just have to, yes, all right. If you search for something, next thing you know, ads pop up for what you search for on different websites. Yes, that's a very, very simple type of tracking. However, you don't even have to buy it. Let's say you search for it. They can decide that you're constantly searching for stuff, and maybe they think because you're searching for it and they attach whatever you're searching for is those type of people commit this type of crime, and well, we better shut this guy off, because not just from the internet, but from his MasterCard or Visa. Maybe he shouldn't be allowed to fly. Maybe he shouldn't be allowed to get a mortgage from a banking institution. So they clearly can create profiles. And that's not a danger of cashless. That's a danger of the digital age and the digital footprint and the ability to make determinations from your digital. Now, this is the point, is that if you're going to battle that, you need to have I think you need to have a digital arsenal too. You need to have access to digital assets that are not restrictive that way. Just like you want to have a alternative to Facebook and Twitter, you want to have an alternative to digital cashless cash. You want to have another way of transacting if you get shut off. So that's why I'm in favor of the cryptocurrencies, not because I like the concept and not because I would create and assign value to them, but I think the reason that they have value is because of the lack of value, or the potential to lose your value that you have in the so-called regular system. All right. No negative rates yet. And the U.S. probably won't have them. That's why they raised the rates. That's what I argued all the time. And they kept saying the Fed will never raise rates. The Fed can't raise rates. Back in 2015, 16, I said they will. They have to. They need to create demand for the dollar. They need to be the world's reserve currency. It has to pay a rate of interest. But others have gone negative. So it's not like you can't do it. De La Ville, under Dodd-Frank, isn't there language that permits a bail-in to save the bank in case of failure? I think they have approved bail-ins. I remember following it for a while in 2013 and 14. I think they've talked about making preparations for that. And people, I should go back and look at it. Yeah, it was 2014 Brisbane G20 Accord bail-ins. I think that's right. Yep. Anita A., this cashless game was hatched sometime long ago. Exactly my point. And it's not just cashless, it's the removing of value from you and your ability to use that value. So when people say, well, then I'm not going to give in and do cryptocurrencies, the cryptocurrencies are actually a way of countering. It's actually the same thing as a competing currency that isn't part of something that can shut you down. It has different features in that, I can't say it enough, they cannot kick you off. They cannot tell you you cannot buy Bitcoin. You cannot use your Bitcoin. There's no one can go into the blockchain and just say, okay, that one, take that one out. It doesn't work that way. Eliminating the top end bills even as inflation ate away the value of dollars from the bottom end. Yep. Anita A., all our dollars are worth less. They come with credit cards and take away LRG bills. If there was not all the scheming, and this LRG bills would be in circulation because things cost more, larger bills needed. That's an interesting point. Cashless has everything to do with it. They control and it's backed by your life. Yes, cashless run by a central authority, absolutely. But that's not what the Bitcoin and Litecoin are about. That's where people, I think, conflate the two. They say it's cashless, and cashless is the issue. No, the issue is the centralized control of a central issuer run by a government. All the cashless does is give them another tool. I just went through an entire 100 years of what they've been doing to remove the control of your money from you. Cryptocurrencies are not, they're cashless, but they don't have the same characteristics, and they can't do the same things to you because there isn't a Bitcoin corporation or a Litecoin sponsor, a censor that can go around and say, well, that one's a bad one. We can't let him use Litecoin. Bitcoin corporation can't say he's got to be kicked off the system. So that's where people need to realize that it's not cashless that's bad. Cashless can be convenient. Cashless can work if there's privacy and you can't be kicked off the system and you have control over your money and they can't debase it the way they can. Like right now, the Fed can just, they printed $4 trillion. The way these cryptocurrencies are set up, like Bitcoin, there's only 21 million coins. They can't just decide, oh, well, now there's going to be 50 million because we want there to be. That's a huge difference. So it's really not a cashless issue. All right. Peter, the guy who I'm buying from because I don't want to give my info to exchanges claims last month he lost his seed word. He's using algorithms, but he forgot. Well, that's an issue too. These cryptocurrencies, you get to store them. You have to memorize a code. It is a nuisance, and I think that's the reason why that hasn't taken off with institutional investors. They don't want that responsibility, so they want to have these custody agreements where they can hold them. But that defeats the purpose as using it as a spendable currency. Then it's like, then I don't think, see, there's any value. You can't spend your Bitcoin. It's not like, well, I have the gold and I can melt it down, or the silver, I can make it into jewelry. There's nothing you can do with it. So if people don't want to spend it, then I don't see what the value in it is. However, that's me, because if people thought the way I did, it wouldn't be $6,900. So that's where I have struggled a long time with it. And then I realized that I don't control how people think. I'm not the one who decides the prices of things. I'm not the one who decides what's fashionable, because if it was up to me, people would wear different stuff. They would use different items. They would eat different foods. So I think that's another problem that people may have. I have it myself, is you take everything personally. So I would never do that. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay. That doesn't mean a lot of other people aren't going to do that. Trace Young, no, the answer is not yes. The answer is the threat to society is a top-down, centrally planned, centrally controlled society and money. Cashless is only just one element which facilitates that control, but we went through and we gave examples over the last 100 years where they gained that control over the money, took away the value of the money, prevented access to your money well before there was a cashless society. Yes, but Anita says, milking the system has worked for them, and so continue. Once they want to milk it, all cashless will be the ticket. But don't conflate government-issued cashless with privately issued cryptocurrencies. Sean Saylor, good show. Thanks. Once you got it going. Trace Young, off the topic a bit. Did you watch the recent Bill Holter, Jim Sinclair show? I actually watched the first 10 minutes of it. Someone asked me last night, and I said, no, I don't watch that stuff. The world is Venezuela. I didn't get to the price predictions. I don't care what people's price predictions are about gold. I know that's what a lot of people want to hear. That's why they get a lot of subscribers. People like to hear that kind of stuff. I don't make predictions, and I'm not interested in other people's predictions, especially ones that have been wrong for 10 years. And then people are just interested. Oh, why are they wrong? Well, they're wrong. It doesn't matter, but people try to justify why they're wrong. I'm not interested. I don't think people can make predictions and be right, and they can make predictions and be wrong. I'm more interested in the analysis without the predictions. Pretty sure that bail-ins are in fact legal now. Yeah, I think you're right, depending on where and how the reset or whatever you want to call it occurs. Okay. Drunk Octopus. Yes. Lewis, have you read The Creature of Jekyll Island? Yes, I have. Also, have you read The Planks of the Communist Manifesto? Yes. It's eerily similar to present U.S. Yeah, people, Drunk Octopus, they don't realize the central planning of a central bank. It is very much governmental control. You're dictating value. You're telling people where they should spend their money, how much of their money they get to keep, how much they can spend, and then what they should spend it on and what the price is that they should pay of it. It is clearly not a free market capitalist environment. Even the freest of markets have the idea that a government-issued money is also, in a sense, you would say communist, because even though you would say in a freer society you're freer to spend it where you want, subject to some taxation and so on, but still, you're not free to spend what you deem to be value and use your medium of exchange. It's not like people decided that the dollar or the euro, whatever the currency is what they want to use. It's been decided that you're going to use it. What do you think of the argument against the gold-backed currency? There isn't enough gold. Well, that's an easy one to get around, but that's not the reason I'm not. The reason I'm against the gold-backed currency isn't because you couldn't expand the money supply. You just make the price of gold higher. One of the problems with Bretton Woods was that they kept the price of gold at $35 an ounce from 1934 to 1971 by law because the U.S. didn't want to devalue the dollar. But here's the thing. That's not the reason I'm against the gold standard. The reason I'm against the gold standard is it'll always fail. Because, well, a Bretton Woods style one will if it's convertible into gold. And you're trusting that the governments are going to run the gold supply and that the governments are going to have the gold. You'd have to give up your gold. You wouldn't have any protection. And you say, oh, I wouldn't need it if there was, my dollar was as good as gold, until they said it wasn't. See, when you have you think when you have a gold standard, what is your protection under a gold standard that the government screws up? Gold? No. Yes, they have all the gold, and in most cases you're not allowed to have it. Remember, during the Bretton Woods agreements, Americans weren't allowed to own gold. So I don't understand why gold bugs actually think we should go back to a gold standard. And I know why they want that. They think, well, then we won't have all this debt. Well, yeah, but that means you have to give up your gold, and it means the government has all the gold. And now you're screwed if they decide they're not going to abide by the gold standard. What if they cheat? So I've never liked the gold standard. And you will find, Anita says, they will centralize total control. You will find out they will centralize. I don't know what you're referring to, but you're right. They always find a way to centralize total control. And I think that's why you need to have items that are outside of their control. Not that they won't try to control them. Look, gold is supposedly outside of their control. They confiscated it. Anything that can be controlled somehow will eventually be controlled. And that's why you need constant innovation to create things that aren't controllable, at least for a period of time. Also, you should look into Nomi Prince, author of All the President's Bankers. I've heard her before. I think I even looked at that book. But we end up with government digital. Yes, that's exactly where it would head. You already have government digital. Most of the dollars you have are in digital form. But that doesn't mean that private currencies are bad because the government has digital currencies. All right. So the problem with the gold standard is government, but the problem isn't that the problem in nearly every monetary system? Yes. Absolutely. Gold doesn't fix corrupt individuals. Greenspan used to say that gold prevents the insidious, invidious, whatever he used, big word, stands between governments and creating a lot of inflation. Yes, but who is binding the government to the gold standard? It's not a law of nature. They have to themselves agree to the gold standard. And if they decide, well, screw this is a problem, and we need to increase the money supply, and we don't want to increase the price of gold, or there's not enough gold coming out of the mines, so why don't we just cheat a little? Well, who's going to stop them? So that's why I don't like the gold standard. Now, what I did like, and I think database DNA is getting somewhat there, if each state had its own gold depository. I think instead of a gold-backed currency, I've always liked the idea of being able to trade in gold and decide I want to trade my goods and services, and it doesn't have to be reciprocal. So someone has oil and someone says, I don't like your currency, I don't want your currency, I want gold. And now that in today's world, you should be able to set up means of payment where you don't have to actually ship the gold physically, although people may want that too. I like, that's fine. That's the way that the classical gold standard worked was somewhat like that. Every country pegged its dollar or whatever it was, currency, to gold. And so when you received payment, you were, in a sense, there was gold going back and forth. But I just like the idea of the gold trade note. But I don't think that, first, no government today would ever go on a gold standard. Trace, I didn't realize you were an anarchist. Not. I actually think that there's government that can do things that protect liberty, you know, small government, constitution, all that. None of that was in the Constitution of the Federal Reserve. In fact, that was anathema. What they thought at the time was that they were using, in fact, they didn't even have their own mint. They were using the pieces of 8, the standard weight silver from that was made from the silver from the New World. That's just what people. That's how people conducted commerce, and the government didn't really feel they had to get involved in what people used as currency. There was still pretty much that was the standard currency. You didn't need a government to say it must be this. In fact, those pieces of 8 were legal tender in the U.S. until the 1850s or so. So they didn't always have the view that it had to be my way or the highway with the money supply. So it's not anarchy. It's basically what is the function of government. And yes, a government should issue its own currency, but it doesn't mean that it has to be the currency from which a central bank directs the economy. That's what the Fed does. It directs the economy. That is not anywhere. That has nothing to do with. That's not a governmental function. That's just become what the bankers have decided it is. Stock up on toilet paper could be worse, some ask. Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, that about does it for the comments and questions. Thank you very much for sticking with me tonight, and we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to do the innovations in technology that have led to this cashless dilemma that we face. Thank you very much, and don't forget to order your Smaulgld mugs. And also visit the Smaulgld store and order some products there. We've got some nice, I'll give you the link here, nice looking Smaulgld branded products that you might like. And also consider becoming a Smaulgld patron. I'm going to give you the link for that. And also consider donating via PayPal or Litecoin, Bitcoin, Ethereum. All the links are on the Smaulgld site and below all of the BitChute and YouTube videos. I'm also on Minds. I'm also on Gab, Twitter, real.video, and Facebook and Google+. So you can check me out pretty much anywhere, but we're here every night at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. Thanks for listening.